Okay, next tip, get started early. Not only do we always encourage you to leave a lot of time to complete your translation projects, but if you're going to involve reviewers, involve them as early in the process as possible. And of course, let your vendor know that they're going to be involved. The last thing that we want as your vendor to hear after we've delivered a project is to have you come back to us a few weeks later and tell us that your reviewers told you it's all wrong. For one thing, that's rarely accurate feedback, but the input tends to be very emotionally charged. You'll hear things like, this translation's completely unusable, it's terrible, who did you use to do this? They couldn't possibly have been a native speaker. All kinds of false accusations about the quality and the process that was used to provide your translation. Hearing this sort of feedback is very upsetting to you. We don't like to hear it, obviously. If we've provided you with a translation, we don't want to hear that we did a terrible job. And our translators, who put a lot of energy into the whole process, really do know what they're doing. They don't want to hear this either. This is very distressing for them. So it's best to let us know up front if you're planning to incorporate feedback from your field so that we can help you manage the process, avoid some of the common pitfalls and all the associated headaches. It's not advisable to wait until a project's complete before you solicit feedback from the field. This would be the equivalent of letting your building contractor install the tile in your bathroom before you ask your spouse how they like it. It's much easier to make a change at the very beginning than to have everything fully installed and then have to rip it out. Just like you wouldn't print your English file before asking for feedback from the field, you want to make sure that you incorporate the reviewer preferences, whether it's in the form of a glossary or other input, as early in the process as possible. We advise our clients, if they're going to be using in-field reviewers, to let them look at unformatted text. Give them a plain Word file versus a fully formatted website, InDesign, or FrameMaker file. When they're looking at text only, they're much less likely to be distracted by graphics, and they're also much less likely to edit the entire piece. The added benefit for you is it's a lot easier to incorporate this feedback prior to formatting. It's a lot quicker, and you won't risk having to pay to have your files reformatted. We also advise our clients to begin with their English file, since very often the translation issues that get reported are really comments about your original text. For example, there might be policies that don't apply in a specific region, or there might be a specific set of products that's emphasized more or less in a foreign market. So when your sales manager or your distributor complains about the translation, they might really be making a comment about the content of your original source file. I'll give you an example that we encountered with one of our medical device manufacturer clients. We were translating clinical documentation for them into a variety of languages. Those documents were then used by physicians in the field to do the initial clinical trials, things like patient consent forms and related documentation. Well, we started getting a lot of complaints about mistakes in our Dutch translations. And it got to the point where we actually got called into this client for a meeting with some of the head folks in their quality control group. Why are we having all these mistakes with Dutch translations? The other languages are fine. These Dutch translations are terrible. Look at all the changes that we're getting back from the physicians in the field. Well, the project manager at ILS did her homework. She had the changes reviewed by Dutch translators. And what we found was these weren't corrections to the translations. These were changes to the text that the physicians were requesting in the field. They were basically just changing up the text so that it had a more natural flow to them in terms of how they wanted to interact with their patients in the field. Once we explained that to our client and they understood what was happening, They made the decision that it was okay to accept what was actually user preferences in the field. They could have saved a lot of time by getting approval on their English documentation first. Then they could have made a decision to change the English and had that changed English translated rather than having the original English translated into Dutch, having their physicians in the field review the Dutch, make these changes, send them back, have them all reviewed, update the files. I'm going to give you another illustration of how this works. This is a typical scenario that's played out every single day. A woman who has had long hair for maybe her entire life goes to the hair salon, decides she wants something different, has it all cut off. She comes home, first thing she says to her partner, husband, or significant other, "Honey, what do you think of my haircut?" 9 times out of 10, honey is completely speechless. I can guarantee you that reaction has nothing to do with the quality of the haircut or the skills of the hairstylist. It usually has everything to do with whether the person you're asking was accustomed to seeing this individual with long hair or happens to love long hair. It has nothing to do with whether the hairstyle is flattering. Professional translation editors have one major role, and that's to ensure that your translation correctly conveys the same message as your source file. They do not inject their personal opinions or preferences about what you should or should not do or what they think is better. So if you tell your professional services vendor that you want short hair is what you're going to get. However, when you are dealing with languages, your native speakers may go to a lot of time and trouble to try and convince you that long hair is the only way to go. It's probably not true. Your reviewers have a tendency to edit text. So if you're going to allow them to do this, it's best to do it before the translation process even begins by having them work with your English file. Your goal is to have one English version that's consistent across all of your target languages. So if you're translating into 12 languages, you're going to want one message across 12 languages. You don't want one English message and then 12 variations all edited according to the personal preferences of whoever is reviewing the translations. And if you've taken our advice and started with a glossary, you've already provided information to the translation services team, so the translation that comes out of that process should be spot on. At that point, the only feedback that you should be receiving is, yes, this is fantastic, thank you so much.